Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stolyarov II, and I am the chairman of the US Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our U.S. Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. Today is Sunday, July 6th, 2025, and for me, it is Sunday evening because I am still in Dublin, Ireland, 2 days after the conclusion of Longevity Summit Dublin, the fourth instance of Longevity Summit Dublin. I have been in attendance at every one of them since the inaugural summit in 2022. And of course, Longevity Summit Dublin began as a collaboration between LEVF, the Longevity Escape Velocity Foundation, of which I'm one of the directors and the treasurer, and Longevity Events Limited, which is a company run by Martin O'D, who has done a tremendous amount of the organizational work for all of the summits. This year was new in that Martin O'D and Longevity Events Limited were essentially the sole and principal organizers of this event. So it was a bit different, a different venue at the Trinity Business School at Trinity College Dublin, but robust attendance, a lot of fascinating presentations, a lot of great people, including longtime participants in the longevity community, as well as some newcomers to it. So joining us today is our distinguished panel of U.S. Transhumanist Party officers, members, allies, and some notable attendees of Longevity Summit Dublin. From the USTP officers, we have our Director of Visual Art and current Vice Chairman, Art Ramon Garcia, and our Director of Scholarship, Dr. Dan Elton. Now, from among the attendees of Longevity Summit Dublin, in addition to myself, we have our friend David Wood of London Futurists. He is also the Executive Director of LEVF, the Longevity Escape Velocity Foundation. And we have Dr. Jose Cordero, who is our Foreign Ambassador in Spain and our Technology Advisor. Both of them are regular guests on our virtual enlightenment salons, and we are also about to be joined by our friend Sven Bulterus from Belgium. He is a member of HEALS, the Healthy Life Extension Society in Europe, and he actually was a guest on one of my panels before I became chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. So he was one of our guests in 2015. I know Sven from a long way back. So welcome to our panelists. Why don't we start with David Wood, because he has some insights as to a few of the notable presentations that transpired. And then we will go to Jose Cordero. He has actually some slides from his presentation that he will share with us today. And then we'll go to Sven for his insights. At least that's our tentative schedule, unless we have other guests making an appearance. But David, please go ahead.
It's my pleasure. And in case other guests do come in, please cut me off. I'd just like to highlight a few of the remarkable talks that I saw. And I could actually talk about 60 remarkable talks because there's a whole bunch of fascinating stuff there, but I'm going to constrain myself to a smaller number. And I'll start with a professor who is based in Dublin, Emma Teeling. She is one of the world's leading researchers into bats. And what do bats have to do with longevity? Well, it turns out that bats are remarkably long-lived for their small size. We're used to measuring IQ or EQ. Well, there's something called LQ, a longevity quotient, which is the expected lifespan divided by the size, roughly. Because by and large, the smaller organisms are, smaller mammals are at least, or birds, then the shorter their lives. Well, some species of bats have remarkably long lifespan, and Emma Teeling's been studying them. And we still don't know exactly how they manage it, despite having their hearts going thumping away at a great speed. But one thing they have is the ability to fight off lots of viruses. And many of us are afraid of viruses, or bats rather, because bats seem to bring viruses to humans. But on the positive side, they have the ability to not be defeated by these same viruses. So that's one thing to learn from them. And another thing to learn from them is many of them, it seems, their telomeres don't shorten. Their telomeres stay the same size throughout their lives. Not all of them. And it turns out there's not just one species of long-lived bat. There are many species of long-lived bats. Bats are one of the most successful groups of mammals, and there are large numbers of different species. And the likelihood is we can learn lots of different things from these different bats. So look up Emma Teeling. The second person I want to mention is Jennifer Garrison, who is a researcher at Buck. And she was one of a number of professors and speakers who spoke about the particular aspects of female aging and longevity. And it turns out there's a whole bunch of things happening in women or females which are different from aging in males. But if we understood them better, perhaps we would have insights into aging all around. She spoke about ovaries. And she said, we tend to think of ovaries as reproductive organs, but it seems they have a much wider role in the signaling that takes place between all the organs in women. And if you look at the aging of different organs, most of them have the same sort of trajectory. They are quite healthy for most of their lives, and they all go downhill later in life. Well, ovaries go downhill much faster, but they don't stop altogether. And so basically, Jennifer Garrison and many others are arguing that we should be studying this much more, not just for the sake of women being healthier for longer, but there are other things we can learn too. Then there's another angle on reproductive health, and I'm going to refer here to Yuta Lee, who is a fascinating researcher, and he has access to a different kind of stem cell. We've all been looking forward to stem cells doing remarkable things for medicine and longevity. It hasn't quite lived up to its promise yet, but he was given by his father, who is a renowned surgeon, quite a while ago, stem cells from a different medium. Well, to be precise, an ectopic pregnancy. So when a baby, unfortunately, or rather the embryo unfortunately gets stuck in the fallopian tube, it very quickly stops being viable and it can grow. And if it's not stopped in time, it can cause the mother's death. And at this stage, the bundle of cells is in two parts. There's the part that would have become the baby, and there's the part that would have become the placenta. And normally all of this is thrown away. But it turns out that the placenta in these ectopic embryos is particularly good for growing stem cells. And the advantage of this is that there are no particular ethical quandaries about using it. These are normally all thrown away, the placenta, but it's a very young placenta, and so the cells there have particular promise. So Yuta has been hanging on to this for a long time until other aspects of the technology are strong enough, but it seems that there's a whole bunch of different therapies that his group is likely to be able to bring to the market. So stem cells and the exosomes that often come with them are examples of additive technologies, ways of helping people to live longer by adding things into bodies. Well, the next two speakers I want to mention both talked about subtractive technologies. That's things we can put into the body to subtract aspects of what's gone wrong in our body. So I want to talk about nanotics. And if you haven't seen the presentations about nanotics before, given by Lou Hawthorne, who's their CEO, I recommend that you spend some time looking at these presentations. There are some online. They are remarkably engaging. What they have there is the ability to remove molecules from what's called the signalome. This is not the genome, it's not the epigenome, it's not the metabolome. The signalome is a set of molecules which are used to signal between different parts of the body. And there's a lot of molecules which can go past their useful time. They can be floating in soluble form in the blood and causing damage later on. It's a bit like the immune reaction. You know, when you have inflammation, to start off with, it's good because the body needs to apply lots of attention to something that's sick or an invader. But if that inflammation goes on too long, it can be very damaging. It's called inflammaging. Well, in the same way, there are lots of molecules that need to be removed. And it's been very hard to remove them up till now, because anything that removes them, any drug that removes them, often damages the same cells when they are not yet in the bloodstream. They are waiting to be activated. And the body still needs these membrane-based cells. And what Luke Hawthorne and his team have developed are nanotics. And this sounds a bit like nanotechnology. It's nano-sized little 4-layer molecules. It's very clever how they're constructed, and you can program them so they will remove the soluble versions but leave the membrane versions alone. And he can tackle lots of different diseases and also lots of different aspects of aging. So he has been building up his understanding and his technology for a number of years, and it seems that he has got more funding than ever before. He's still looking for more funding, but that was encouraging. Somebody else who has got fascinating subtractive technology is Matthew O'Connor from Cyclarity, which, by the way, was spun out from SENS some time ago. And they have also a platform. So nanotics is one type of platform to remove elements of damage, but targeting it very precisely. Well, what Cyclarity have got is a particular expertise in something called cyclodextrins. I'm not going to try and describe a cyclodextrin. I'll surely get it wrong, but it can be tailored to a very precise geometry so that it attaches just to one particular molecule that is causing damage. And like nanotics can be targeted at many different sources of damage. Also, these cyclodextrins can be targeted at many. But the lead target for Cyclarity is something that kills huge numbers of people. It's the cause of atherosclerosis. That's when there's too much junk accumulates in our arteries, and it's caused by macrophages not being able to properly clear certain kinds of cholesterol. There's one molecule called 7-ketocholesterol. Well, Matthew O'Connor and his team have come up with a cyclodextrin that's precisely targeted to remove this. And this is very good news, because people who have been accumulating this junk in our arteries, we can use statins to slow down the pace of accumulation, but there's been nothing up to now to remove it. And so that's very encouraging too. And in both cases, I expect there will be lots of different solutions coming. But having spoken positively, the last of the 6 people I'm going to mention is Andrew Steele. Andrew Steele believes passionately in the ability of these technologies to help undo aging, but he thinks that by default, it's going to take a long time. So he spoke in the final session, along as it happens with Brian Kennedy. They were anticipating what might happen by 2035, and Andrew Steele's forecast is that unless things change significantly, we're still only going to be making modest progress probably by 2035. On the other hand, he sees lots of ways in which that progress could speed up. But in each case, guess what? What's missing is funding. So Andrew's presentation, when it comes online, I recommend all of you watch it. He is not just a scientist, he is an excellent science communicator. And out of many good presentations that I saw, Andrew's was about top of the bunch. I didn't see all of them, so I apologize for if I didn't highlight all the great presentations. But Andrew's presentation says, well, we're probably going to need up to $100 billion to be released some stage early, hopefully, in the next 10 years. And if we can do that, we'll have enough to tackle many different hallmarks of aging and many types of damage simultaneously. Andrew thinks it's possible that addressing one type of damage might be enough to fix all the other types as well, but it's unlikely. He thinks we're going to need lots of different approaches in parallel, so he works out $100 billion. And that's not so much when you look at it from one point of view, which is there are probably 1 billion adults in reasonably well-off parts of the world. And if each such adult had $100 to give, we would get up to 100 billion. So what's holding us up? And Andrew has created a new institute called the Longevity Institute. You've got to type all these 3 words in. If you type just Longevity Institute, you'll go to something else altogether. But thelongevityinstitute.com, there's nothing much there now, but he has just announced this institute. And what they're trying to do is to come up with policy recommendations to governments to encourage governments to apply much more funding in this area. And many other people have said, well, we've got to have petitions to the governments to encourage them to pay attention to this field. Well, Andrew's trying to, Longevity Initiative. I think it's the Longevity Institute. No, it is called the Longevity Institute. I looked it up earlier. And Andrew is coming up with recommendations which will cause the holders of public purse strings to make donations. So he has created this together with a Bulgarian lawyer based in London called Kamen Sholev. It's a bit too early for them to say much about it, but I expect he'll be on a future Transhumanist Party virtual enlightenment salon when he's ready to say more. So it was a great presentation in terms of here are the possibilities, here's what's holding up each of these possibilities, and with a positive vision that let's be as smart as possible in finding ways to talk to political leaders to encourage them to unleash lots more funding and, by the way, make some changes to the regulatory systems as well. So there's a brief snapshot as to some of the fascinating presentations which I saw in Dublin.
Yes, thank you very much, David. And I second your comment about the desirability of having Kamen Sholev come on to a future virtual enlightenment salon. He is a lawyer, and our audience has expressed an interest in hearing more presentations from people in the legal profession, but he always has a very interesting angle with regard to any of the subjects that he discusses. They're exceptionally well researched, and he provides a lot of good factual objective background as to the subjects that he discusses. So I met him at Vitalist Bay during the Longevity Policy Conference, and I think he would indeed make an excellent guest. In regard to Clarity and Matthew O'Connor, I did connect with him as well during the summit, and we have scheduled what will hopefully be a segment where he will be providing some comments in July, but that is to be fully determined in the coming weeks, but hopefully sometime by the end of July, we will have a salon featuring Matthew O'Connor and Clarity. And there's a lot more to say on each of the topics that you mentioned, David, so thank you very much. But at this time, let us go to Dr. Jose Cordero. Jose, please let us know what you thought of Longevity Summit Dublin, and also feel free to deliver your presentation.
Yes, thank you very much. And I agree with many of the things that David was mentioning, because those were top presentations, of course. And one of the good things is that there are longevity conferences all over the world now. I personally will be going this year to 20 conferences in 20 different cities. So it's good because we need to get to the local publics, to the public in Ireland, to the public in the USA, to the public in the United Kingdom, etc., etc., etc. During the Longevity Summit Dublin, there were many good presentations. In fact, there were many running also in parallel. So this is the presentation I made in parallel, which I think should be interesting also for people in the USA and other parts of the world, because we are positioning Madrid as the longevity capital of Europe. Which has been, as you know, the longevity dream, or as I like to say, immortality, the biggest dream of humanity since the beginning. As we know, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, thousands and thousands of years ago, in Mesopotamia, written in cuneiform writing style, the first book ever written by humans, also the Book of the Dead in Egypt, 4,000 years old, or Emperor Qin Shi Huang, who built the terracotta army because he also wanted to be immortal. In terms of Spain, there is a long tradition of immortality. In fact, Juan...
Now, Jose, I don't think we see your slides advancing, so the instance that you've shared is the PowerPoint window rather than the full screen view there. Now we see the Fountain of Youth.
Okay, thank you. So Juan Ponce de Leon, when he went to the Americas that were discovered or rediscovered by Spain in 1492, he was looking for the Fountain of Youth. And many of the other explorers, discoverers were looking for immortality. So this tradition of immortality is also important in Spain. Spain, 2,000 years ago, when it was part of the Roman Empire, was the end of the Roman Empire to the west. And that is why Spain was called the country of non plus ultra, which in Latin means nothing far beyond, because Spain was the end to the west of the Roman Empire. But then, when America was discovered or rediscovered in 1492, the motto, the logo of Spain was changed to plus ultra. And now we are trying to make it into longevity, and we say we have to move into vita plus ultra. And this is the goal that I'm pursuing in Spain with many colleagues, to position Spain as a longevity country and Madrid as the longevity capital.
So we're still not seeing the slides advance, unfortunately. I think you may be advancing them in the full screen view, but the view that you're sharing is the PowerPoint interface. So let's see what we can do to change that. Yes, I think you can manually move them, but you would have to move them within this interface here. Yes.
Okay. So you see then Madrid, statistically speaking, it is a reality. Madrid is the most longevous city in the European Union. And Spain is the most longevous country in the European Union. If you look at the numbers, Madrid is 86.1 years. These are not the Spanish numbers. These are European numbers from Eurostat, which is the statistical center of Europe. And then you can see other places that have lower life expectancies. But this is also interesting to compare to the USA. The USA has the lowest life expectancy among advanced nations, with only 78, now picking back up to 79 after COVID. It's still very much lower than in Europe. So there are many things to be learned about the European experience, and particularly the Spanish experience and the Madrid experience. It is true that there are some other countries. Among larger countries, only Japan has a larger life expectancy. And then there are small countries. You could name maybe Hong Kong. Switzerland also has a probably longer life expectancy. And in the Vatican, in Rome, in the Vatican, they say they are already immortals. So that is also another thing to consider. But the trends in Spain keep on going up. And there are many studies that show that in the next 20 years, Spain will overtake Japan and leave behind China and the USA in terms of life expectancy. That is the reason why I was a candidate for the European Parliament in the last two elections, in 2019 and then again in 2024. And my goal is that we do something in Europe in terms of life expectancy, because not only do we have larger life expectancies than the USA and many other places, but there is no national or European Institute of Anti-Aging. So my goal was to create the European Anti-Aging Agency. Many of these ideas I had the pleasure to develop with my friend David Wood that just spoke, and we wrote a book that came out just before the elections to the European Parliament that helped to position these ideas, The Death of Death. And when the book came out, it was immediately number 1 and number 5 simultaneously in Amazon. Number 1 in paper and number 5 in Kindle. This was obviously in Spanish, but then it has been coming out in many more languages. We have been donated all the royalties, the book rights, to 2 institutions for the Spanish edition, the Sense Research Foundation in the USA, and a Spanish organization called Apadrina la Ciencia. The book also has the prologue of Aubrey de Grey and the epilogue of my friend Alex Shavorenkov. The book now is soon going to be in over 20 languages by next year. It has sometimes different titles in different languages, but the book is doing very well, especially in the 3 top languages of the world, which are Spanish, English, and Chinese. And then again, that is why we want to organize this activity in Madrid, the International Longevity Summit. This will be the second time we organize it. Last year, it was the first time, coinciding with October 1st. Why October 1st? Because that is International Longevity Day. And last year, we had about 300 participants. This year, we plan to have hopefully 500 participants, which will position our event as the biggest event, not only in Spain, but the second biggest in Europe after the conference in Copenhagen, ARDD, Aging Research and Drug Discovery. We will do it in a very important place, in the College of Medical Doctors of Spain. This is a very important institution. It compiles all the medical doctors of Spain, and they are 55,000 medical doctors in Spain. That is a large number, important number. And we will do it in the most beautiful amphitheater of Spain, classical amphitheater, which is where the Nobel Prize winner from Spain in medicine, Santiago Ramón y Cajal, gave his lectures. A beautiful place, a beautiful speakers. We are bringing speakers from all over the world, beginning also with Madrid. The mayor of Madrid will be speaking at the conference. And not only because Madrid is the most longevous city in the European Union, but because we need to push this idea in Spain, in Europe, and throughout the world, that it is possible to have longer life expectancies. And we are going to declare Madrid as a real blue zone, or a blue zone 2.0, because the blue zones now are not real. They are basically marketing. There are a few things which are important, of course, the diet, exercise, family relations, all of those things that we have, for example, in Spain or in Madrid. But it is important to be able to scientifically prove if this is so. And we are going to be presenting 3 top studies about why Spain and Madrid have the longest life expectancy in Europe. One by the top management consulting company McKinsey, actually the McKinsey Health Institute, that takes Madrid as the example of a longevous city. Also by the National Science Foundation of Spain, which is the top scientific institution in Spain. And also the Royal Academy of Medicine. Spain, as you know, has top scientists like Juan Carlos Ispizua Belmonte, who was before one of the directors of the Salk Institute in La Jolla, San Diego, California, and now he's part of Altos Labs. One of the investors, as you know, is Jeff Bezos. By the way, Jeff Bezos was in Madrid for his bachelor's party, and we will have our party, the Longevity Party, in the same place where Jeff Bezos had his bachelor party. We have been bringing many top people, scientists, like we brought also a couple of years ago, Shinya Yamanaka, for another special activity with the College of Medical Doctors in Spain. And we will be talking about the things coming up. Like, I'm very excited about the X Prize Foundation and Evolution Prize that my friend Peter Diamandis announced in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia in November of 2023. There are over 600 teams participating in this, out of which 5 are Spanish, and one of the top 40, that is the highest ranking as of now, one of the top 40 is a Spanish team. So we are very proud to have Spanish teams. We also want to invite you to come to Madrid and to see the country, which is beautiful. Spain, together with Italy and together with China, are the top 3 countries in UNESCO World Heritage Sites. And many of these sites are around Madrid. So we want you to come with us to see the beauties of Spain and to understand why we need to live longer, to see these places, to learn from other cultures. For example, we will see the Roman aqueduct of Segovia. Actually, my mother is from Segovia, so I'm very proud. This is the biggest, longest, oldest Roman aqueduct still standing up over 2,000 years ago in Segovia. We will also see the beautiful Alcázar de Segovia, the castle of Segovia, that was the inspiration for Neuschwanstein in Bavaria, in Germany, and for the Disneyland castle in Disneyland, if you have been to Disneyland. Anyway, the conference will be fantastic. We will have a lot of side activities as well. We will have fantastic Spanish food, Mediterranean diet. We will launch the Madrid Longevity Declaration, explaining why Madrid is the leading city in Europe and Spain the leading country. We will have also films, documentaries, like Longevity Hackers, that we actually filmed part of it in the Medical College in Madrid. Since I am an advisor to that film, I'm one of the people interviewed. And we will have a rally. We will have a march throughout Madrid. We will begin at the famous City Hall of Spain, which is where Real Madrid, the best football team, the best soccer team in the world, celebrates continuously. And we will be carrying flags. We will have balloons. We will have banners. We will have T-shirts saying "Stop Aging" in Spanish. Of course, aging is long in Spanish, envejecimiento, but we will be talking about "Stop Envejecimiento" in the City Hall, in the government of Spain, in the Congress of Spain, and also in the European Parliament offices in Spain. So we are very proud about taking public opinion to understand how important longevity is. We will also have prizes. We will have the Cibeles prize. Cibeles is the symbol of Madrid, and she was a Turkish goddess 20,000 years ago, a goddess from Turkey, and she's a symbol of fecundity and longevity. So we will have prizes like last year. We also gave a posthumous award to Maria Brañas, who was the oldest living person in the world until she died last year, just before our conference. She was going to speak virtually in our conference, but sadly, she died at the age of 117 days and 117 years and 168 days. Anyway, so we will have the Cibeles Longevity Awards in Madrid. We have had incredible media coverage. We were in all the media in Spain and also internationally in many different publications. So we are very proud. And we have incredible sponsor institutions, like the top institutions of Spain that I mentioned, the College of Medical Doctors, the Royal Academy of Medicine of Spain, the government of Madrid, the Innovation Center of Madrid, and we have an incredible scientific committee led by George, who will be one of our keynote speakers, and I think everybody knows George, so no explanation needed for him. And so all of you are welcome for the UNESCO World Heritage Visit, September 29 and 30, and for the Longevity Summit, October 1st and 2nd. So, as I like to say to all my friends, live long and prosper.
All right. Thank you, Jose. And of course, we should all live long and prosper. And for those of you who would like to attend Transvision Madrid, here again is the website, transvisionmadrid.com. Let's show Jose with the Stop Aging shirt in Spain. So here he is. And you had balloons that also had this design as well, and you had the flag of Spain with you. You brought it on our, let's say, extracurricular excursions around town as well. Oh, we're going to see the balloon. Excellent, excellent. Yes, so these have been quite popular in Spain during the longevity marches that you have done. They've attracted a lot of attention, a lot of interest. You've said in a previous presentation that even the police have joined in the marches with you. So I look forward to seeing what you're able to achieve there this year. And we have some good words from our attendees. So first of all, Alberto Aparicio, who was also there at the summit, writes great panelists and coverage of the summit. Luis has some words of praise for David Wood, keeping transhumanism alive across the pond. And then with regard to the Death of Death book, Mike Lazine writes, well done, Jose and David. Jason Geringer likes the theater in which Transvision Madrid will be held. And Mike Lazine agrees that was a beautiful theater, great architecture. So thank you to our audience for these comments, and we will discuss more as the salon progresses. Now I would like to invite Sven Bulteris to provide his impressions of the 2025 Longevity Summit Dublin.
Okay, hello everyone. Can you see my slides?
Yes, just
okay.
A moment. Yes, here it is.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, I just took a few pictures from the conference and I put them in a PowerPoint presentation. So yeah, the quality is maybe not the best, but we have to do with what we have. How can I start after the amazing summary that David already gave us? He touched upon many of the great lectures that were given that I would also like to highlight. For example, Emma Thieling's lecture. I was not familiar with her before. She presented a lot of unpublished data, and you know, there's nothing greater when you are at a conference when the unpublished data get presented, because published data you can read at home, but unpublished data you obviously can't read. So that's always great to learn new things. I saw multiple lectures that I had seen before, for example, in Berlin last year, but of course there were updates. So those were the lectures of Lou Hawthorne, Dobby Kiprov and Oki O'Connor. I had seen those before, but there was news in them, and that was exciting news. And one other thing we learned at the conference is what is here on the slide. So you see here an aging clock, the immunology pace clock. And what was pointed out here is that you have to be careful to look at trajectories and not just look at individual time points. So here in red, you see, for example, someone who started with a younger biological age, but as time progressed, that person aged fast. While here you see someone who started with an older biological age, but actually it slightly declined over time. So the trajectory is very important rather than looking at an individual time point. And there were multiple lectures on various clocks and ways of measuring epigenetic age or biological age. So here, this was one of the slides that was put up. Tom Cruise at 60 versus Val Kilmer at 62, both played in the famous movie together. Since then, Val has died and Tom is still doing quite well. So two people of about the same age chronologically, but with a very big difference in health outcomes. And one of the clocks that was extensively discussed in the conference was this one that was developed by Jan Huber. And what they did is they took 60 clinical parameters, so demographics, but also things about the blood, workup of people, and they made a biological clock from that. And then they used the principal component analysis, which is a mathematical technique that allows you to reduce the dimensionality of data. And you get all of these principal components out of it, and different principal components are associated with different diseases. So this means it's a clock where you don't just get a single number out, you're biologically 40 or whatever, but you actually get more information about your specific disease risk. And in fact, there was another lecture from his collaborator. Her name is Cheng Fong. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And he really showed the clinical application of this clock, where he applied it to real patients. And for example, there was one patient that had a very high principal component. Was it the first one or whatever it was? One of them, which was known to be associated with stroke, and indeed that person died from stroke. And that person was also biologically way older than she was chronologically, and indeed she was having a very bad health and died very soon after the measurements. So they showed also that this clock, this lineage 2 clock, has very, so this is a rock curve, and basically the higher it is, the more rectangular shaped it is, so this is ideal, the better the clock is, and the clock is better than the other ones that are shown here, so very great. Then there was also Aubrey de Grey's lecture, and he presented the data on the robust mouse rejuvenation trial. I don't need to tell you about those data because they have all been on Facebook, so I think everyone probably has seen them by now. But they are hoping to set up the rejuvenation, the robust mouse rejuvenation second trial. That will be including all of these types of interventions, so quite a lot more than in the first one. And they are looking for $5 to $6 million of funding to fund this research. There was also an update from the dog aging project by Matt Kaimberlein. Sadly, the grant for the continuation of this trial was not renewed, but they are submitting a new grant, a proposal, and let's have our fingers crossed that they really get this, because I think this is really great research. Dogs are a lot more closer to humans than even mice are, so this is very relevant research. And so, yeah, what can I say else? Oh, yeah, of course, but David already mentioned it, is the amazing lecture that Andrew Steele gave. And he's really a person who is very capable of inspiring people and drumming up enthusiasm to get off our butts and get to work, even though he was kind of skeptical because of the lack of urgency among many people to do something about aging. And yeah, to close, but again, this was also previously mentioned already, there were several, one at the first day of the conference, the pre-conference day, I should say, and then there was a session within the conference, both devoted to female health, and it's a quite under-studied area of research, and we know from many interventions that they show sex or specific effects. So if you look at the ITP, the Interventions Testing Program, there are multiple interventions that are working in males, but not in females, or interventions that work in females, but not in males, or where the effect size of the intervention is quite different between sexes. So sadly, we know about the situation in the United States where they are actually going back and they are removing the need of studying sex effects on outcomes in clinical trials. And I hope they reconsider that because it's very important. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Sven. I appreciate your presentation and overview of some of the key speakers and some of the key ideas that were presented at the summit. I will add that Jennifer Garrison, whom David had mentioned, also spoke extensively about the scope and extent of harm that cuts to federal funding of scientific research, particularly at the National Institutes of Health, are inflicting. Indeed, she had a slide where she mentioned essentially algorithmic approaches, very crude algorithmic approaches toward denying grant applications and rescinding already given approvals for grants using essentially certain keywords that are banned. And I noted in the Q&A, one of the phrases that was banned was evidence-based. So it seems that the cuts are so sweeping that any proposal that has a mention of anything evidence-based in it is on the chopping block. And it was discussed that NIH funding in the United States is by far the predominant source of funding for scientific research. It dwarfs private industry funding, philanthropic funding, even funding from large foundations. And that in itself may be a suboptimal situation in that a lot of researchers are essentially dependent on the whims of the political process now. And when a new faction comes into power, their research projects are in jeopardy, including the research projects that have already been initiated. It is actually why I have long emphasized, well, government funding of research comes with strings attached, and one needs to be very careful about those strings attached, because the nature of those strings too can change over time and can change quite dramatically. So that's an unfortunate situation. I think it has a lot of longevity researchers on edge right now, and I definitely gathered a sense of this. Now, Dan, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, you guys can hear me, right? Yeah, I agree
Yes.
with everything you just said. And I can talk more about what's going on at NIH if people are interested, but I was actually interested in learning a little more about the dog aging project, because I remember a year or two, maybe 6 months ago or a year ago, they were, it sounded like they were actually looking for private donations.
Yes, so the NIH, my understanding is the NIH had not renewed the grant for the dog aging project, and this happened in 2023. I remember Aubrey was posting about it on Twitter as well, noting the tragedy and travesty of this in his view. And it seems that there was some philanthropic funding that was found as a bridge for the dog aging project. So currently it is privately funded, it continues, but my impression of Matt Kaberlein's remarks is this was intended to be temporary. This was intended to keep the lights on, so to speak, and they are applying for another NIH grant now with hopes that they will be renewed for a 5-year period. So these grants apparently are for 5 years. And David also points out one of the many words whose presence on a grant application will cause it to be rejected is measles. And I think we know whose influence that is. So that's such an unfortunate situation that this is the crude way in which grants are being rejected. But hopefully that answers your question, Dan.
Yeah, no, it's, their grants are getting canceled left and right, and there's very severe budget cuts that have been proposed, I think up to 40%. And normally you would say, well, the Congress usually overrides whatever the president proposes, and usually the president doesn't really get what they propose. But we just saw a bill that was passed, the so-called Big Beautiful Bill, that was largely dictated by Trump, and so the Republicans seem to just be falling in line. So it's a bit scary. And also, what surprised me is they're also looking to cut NASA by up to 50%, which is crazy, because NASA's, both NIH and NASA are two of the most popular agencies among the public.
Yes, and NIH and NASA are both agencies that bring about the greatest return for each dollar spent. It's a return of many multiples. So I think it's a very short-sighted and ill-founded decision. But Dan, please feel free to say anything else you have on this.
The other thing was the way they did the cuts was very irrational, because they basically just cut across the board, and they had a goal to centralize a lot of the HR staff who were in different institutes, but they basically just cut all the HR staff before this centralized HR had been set up. So one of the big issues at NIH is it's very hard to do anything like hiring or getting travel funding approved, or getting funding for your lab equipment, because there's no staff to process anything.
Indeed.
And there were also some crazy things that happened at the National Institute of Aging. Like, apparently Luigi Ferrucci got an email saying he was fired, and then they rescinded it the next day or something. So, yeah.
Yes, there have been a lot of firings and rescissions at the federal government because of the rather thoughtlessly enacted DOGE, the so-called Department of Government Efficiency, which itself seems to have floundered, and a lot of those cuts have been reversed because they were cutting really essential personnel, like people who were managing the safety of the nuclear weapons stockpile, or the Ebola response, or air traffic controllers, who are already in woefully short supply. But I can fully identify with your comments about the problems that arise with excessive centralization of HR functions, because the most qualified individuals to make hiring decisions are those who will be working with the people who get hired. And therefore, the less centralized the HR function is, the more autonomy actual managers within agencies have to hire people, the easier it would be to find qualified people, because those who are closer to the work know what the work entails and know what kinds of skill sets are needed. The HR people have no idea, essentially.
Well, I haven't heard that. I mean, I think generally the HR people just assist with processing a lot of the paperwork. And most people I've talked to at NIH agree that centralizing the HR and centralizing the IT staff was actually a good idea. They just disagree with how it's being done. So that's why
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yes. There is a risk, though, that there would be people who essentially approach the function as a kind of check the box exercise. Mm-hmm. And they may especially be overly rigid in how they enforce the qualifications for particular positions. So
they are enforcing more rules. Like right now, NIH staff supposedly can hire postdocs. I've heard it's difficult, but you can hire postdocs, but they can only be U.S. citizens right now. And there's different rules that keep coming down that are basically being dictated from the highest levels. So there's more sort of micromanagement and rules coming down than, say, like the first Trump administration.
Indeed.
And they're definitely centralizing control of a lot of things.
Yes, that is unfortunate.
So yeah.
So Alberto Aparicio writes that he concurs the cuts in federal funding are concerning for biotechnology and for longevity as a whole. David Sinclair's lab in Harvard was deprived from all federal funding, and David Sinclair had made that announcement on Twitter as well. So they are essentially having to suspend research projects that were ongoing, unfortunately. And then Luis Arroyo notes the private market may not be able to make up for all of these cuts. That is the worry right now, because the other sources of funding are, let's say, much less abundant than the NIH grants were.
What we need, Gennady, what we need is more basic research. And I think I'm not sure generally private funding is mostly for stuff with a more immediate return for, biotech startups and stuff. So I talked to actually Rainey, this woman, and Rainey Romani. They have a book coming out on I don't want to say the title because they're still finalizing it, but one of the big points is that private funding just isn't enough. We need a lot of public funding, especially for the basic aging biology research.
Yes, certainly it is not a good idea, and it does not help anyone to have the prior funding commitments essentially yanked out from under those researchers. So even those who would favor privatization of these functions, such as Ayn Rand, when she wrote about the subject in 1962, would, if they're sensible, support a gradual kind of transition. So she had a passage where she was asked essentially what would she do if she were president of the United States in terms of transitioning the economy from one with heavy government intervention to more of a laissez-faire economy. And she said, well, she would decontrol gradually because so many people's plans, including those of people in the private sector, are dependent on the current government programs, the current rules, and you can't just suddenly end them and expect that people would instantaneously adjust. There are a lot of projects in progress that very understandably were dependent on these funds or dependent on the current structures. So the way in which it happened, the sudden and arbitrary nature of it is unfortunately going to do a lot of damage. Alberto Aparicio writes, we're living a war on science, very concerning, especially as other countries will continue to make progress, like China. Now, Jason Geringer has made some comments that actually relate to a lot of the topics that were discussed at the Longevity Summit. He writes, on the plus side, a lot of this AI research has been coming out in an open source manner. Once the cat is out of the bag, it's out. We can make agents do research now. The whole acceleration idea with LEV is the same as the AI acceleration idea. Once it starts programming itself, you don't have to do much anymore. Once we can get AI doing it, we may not need all that stuff. He says he's being optimistic, but he also thinks this is realistic because the acceleration of intelligence is still going to happen. And he notes, though, he knows it seems like intelligence has been going backward recently, human intelligence, that is, or human stupidity, as Jose would put it. But AI was indeed discussed extensively at the Longevity Summit. So I would invite those who were in attendance to comment on the range of perspectives, as well as your own views on how AI is going to affect the prospects for longevity research going forward.
Well, if I may make a small remark concerning the funding. So one of the great things that Andrew Steele did is he broke down the funding for research, and the NIA is given by the American taxpayer $1.30 per person. So that's the full amount that each American person each year gives for what is basically killing almost 90% of the population. And that's just insane, in my opinion.
Yes. Aging.
It's not even a cup of coffee.
Right. Right. Aging research was already disproportionately underfunded prior to this, and now, unfortunately, even more so, especially since the National Institute on Aging is an institution that seems to be on its way out. It was already under attack by certain members of Congress prior to these cuts. So it's a troubling development. David, I know you have some thoughts about AI and scaling.
Yes, so let me pick up a few of the very interesting lines of discussion. A couple of the speakers both talked about AI and the possibilities for AI to accelerate dramatically the progress with longevity. And both of them were quite skeptical about it. I'm referring to both Andrew Steele and Aubrey de Grey. And both of them said, these breakthroughs that AI has made in biology has been dependent upon collecting data. And unless there is data collected first, it's hard for an AI to work out the new insight. So Andrew Steele pointed out there had been a large publicly funded initiative to collect the structures of some of the proteins. This was the famous PDB, the Protein Data Bank. And it had started very slowly, and it took a long, long time, over many decades. And only when enough of that had been worked out by painstaking methods such as X-ray diffraction and so on, that was allowed the much faster progress to be made by the AI of AlphaFold. But unless the data is collected, you can't do this. As I had at one of Didier Cornell's events, before you can join the dots, you've got to collect the dots. And so this is what needs to be done. So both Aubrey and Andrew Steele in their various ways are optimistic in due course that AI will help, but not until various biological experiments have been done. And in particular, the experiments to find out, does this damage repair mechanism actually work in different animals? And you can't work out in advance unless you've got a complete model of biology. Demis Hassabis does look forward to the time when we've got a complete, reliable model of an entire cell, but this isn't going to come straight away. It's who knows how long it's going to take to get there. So that is one method of scaling things up, but it's not the only method. And I can speak a little bit more to answer a question that Mike Lazine put in earlier, which is how are these remarkable technologies which were spoken about in various presentations, how are they going to come down in price? And AI might be part of the solution, but there are other things that's going to bring it down. And the first thing that's going to bring down the cost is scale. When you're only manufacturing something for a very small number of people, it is expensive. But when you do it for much larger numbers of people, there is a famous law. It sounds a bit like Moore's law. I forget what it's actually called. But as you manufacture in larger and larger amounts, you learn clever ways to do it better. And so it's something like this cost comes down as you do it more often. But still, there is the risk. Well, what's going to make people scale this up? By the way, you can see this in the declining cost curve for solar conductors and solar energy. It has come down much faster than most forecasters predicted because it's now in much larger scale. But even in that case, how did the solar manufacturers scale up? They needed government assurances and government subsidies. Government assurances that if things were produced in scale and they worked, then the government would guarantee certain volumes. And Aubrey de Grey has a great way of explaining this. And he refers to what he said, ironically, is perhaps the best thing that's ever happened to longevity. Wait for it. It's COVID. How on earth could COVID be the best thing that's ever happened to longevity? Well, COVID shows that when people really have their minds put into a crisis, we are capable of doing things much faster than was previously expected. So before COVID, the fastest that any vaccine for a coronavirus, it had taken 10 years to do it. And any other vaccine for another thing, it had taken at least 3 years. Now, with Project Warp Speed, There was a focus as never before, not just on developing the individual vaccines, but ensuring they could be scaled up, that all the different problems that would emerge, people were thinking about them in advance. So one of the vaccines needed to be stored at a lower temperature than normal glass could cope with. And so another part of the Project Warp looked at ways in which the best glass manufacturers, I think it's Corning Glass, they were able to produce a variant that would work at the sufficiently low temperature. And they worked out the logistics of getting this distributed all over the country. And who did they use to do the distribution? They turned to the best private companies for doing distribution, like DHL and FedEx. So they had the whole thing lined up. So scale backed by government assurances that if something is good, they will underwrite the costs. That gets there. And as you have more people working in this, particularly in a competitive environment, there is more incentive to be innovative. And so innovation will bring down the cost as well, provided, again, there are plenty of different approaches that are being tackled. And this comes back to the question, well, how is this going to be funded? Because for all these people to be working here, you need the funding. And I want to refer here to the chart that Andrew Steele showed, because it didn't just show here's what's being spent, minuscule amounts on research into aging. He also showed here are other things where we are spending much more money. And he said, well, we're spending all this money on this and all this money on this. And the thing that cost much more money was treating people who were chronically ill of the diseases which are age-related. We spend enormous amounts on that, hundreds and thousands of times as much. So the argument that Andrew Steele proposes to take to the politicians is various ways to say, look, you just need to invest a small fraction of that huge amount of money, and you will have the potential of having huge savings in what you're spending. So we need to put some money in, and absolutely it needs to be publicly sourced, because private investors or private donors are never going to come up with enough. But when you can do that, then you can trigger this ecosystem of lots of clever humans, lots of different approaches around the world. And yes, you can use AI to accelerate things too. But without funding, it's going to go slowly. Hence, the most important thing is to make the case for funding in a way that the various politicians can respect and understand. That's how we'll get the costs down. After all, I remember when we were talking about how much is the coronavirus vaccines, how much are they going to cost? Initially, people were afraid, well, it's only going to be for the wealthy, only for the wealthy countries. And the cost was brought down low for all the reasons I've mentioned, the scaling and also government subsidies. And it was enlightened government subsidies, because if you spend a little bit of money to vaccinate people, you don't need to spend anything like so much money dealing with people when they are chronically ill, deeply ill as a result. So these are some of my observations. AI is part of the solution, but it is not the whole solution. And we must avoid a rather unfortunate tendency, which is that many people with money are just investing in AI, thinking that AI is going to solve everything. Instead, we need to keep on doing the biotech experiments, wet lab experiments, actually trying damage repair mechanisms on different mammals, the mice and the dogs. And what Matt Cabeline's doing with his dog aging project is absolutely fundamental. And we must find a way to keep that going. By the way, that project is funded a lot by the owners of the dogs. People love looking after the dogs. A lot of the costs are met by the owners of each dog. But that's not going to be enough to do some of the other detailed testing. So we must get this funded by other means.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, David. And I completely agree with you and Aubrey about the importance of the wet lab experiments. The fact is, no matter what the advances in AI are, until the AI becomes embodied and essentially exists in the forms of androids who have great manual dexterity, who can go into the labs and do the research themselves, we're going to need human researchers to do studies in the lab and gather empirical data for the AI to analyze, because the AI tools can be great for analytical purposes, but they need the raw data from the external reality. They have no way of getting the data themselves without the wet lab experiments. So that's a really important point, and it seems Mike Lazine is in agreement as well. Alberto Aparicio agrees with your comments. David, in particular, he states that Aubrey's referral to COVID was a great moment of the summit. Make aging the new COVID. Mike Lazine writes, if we get something like COVID-19 again, there will be far more people who die than the last time. Very scary and sad. Well, interestingly enough, though, what's very scary and sad is right now, far more people die of aging than died of COVID in particular. And even those who died of COVID had their mortality risk greatly increased by biological aging. So we are already living in this reality. The question is, how do we get the public to recognize this and recognize the moral imperative of combating it? So now, Jose, please go ahead with your remarks.
Yes, this is a fascinating discussion, and I loved all the comments also made by Sven, Dan, that spoke also. Very important points, and I have a few things to say. First, David, the correct website of Andrew Stills is thelongevity.initiative.org. The Longevity Initiative. It's not the Longevity Institute. It's different. One thing. The other thing about Madrid is that those who cannot come in person, we are also going to be streaming live. We are going to be broadcasting from Madrid to the world in both languages, in English and Spanish. The conference will be mostly in English, but there will be a few presentations that will be translated from Spanish to English, because the mayor of Madrid, he will speak in Spanish, as his public position requires. As the mayor of Madrid, the capital of Spain and the Spanish-speaking world, he is forced to speak in Spanish. So he will be translated into English, but all the other speakers really will be mostly basically in English, and there will be translation though into Spanish, so that you know that if you cannot come to Madrid, you can join us virtually. I have a few other comments. Dan, what you said is very interesting, but also we have to look at maybe some positive signs. Like my alma mater, MIT, just published MIT Technology Review, where they have a special article about Jim O'Neill. So Jim O'Neill, that many of you know, has been involved for a long time in longevity, is now the second person in command in the HHS. So I think this could be very positive. Of course, we don't know what will happen, but I think this is very positive. So I try to look within the problems, what are the opportunities. Also, when Sven said that it is only a cup of coffee, that is true. That is for our US friends. But Sven, what are you doing yourself? Because in Belgium, it's not even that. In Belgium, it's not even that. So don't complain about our US friends when in Belgium, it's not even that. That is why I ran for politics, because this has to be a fundamental issue in Spain, in Belgium, in Europe, because we don't have anything like the National Institutes on Aging. And we should, because Europe is much older, it's aging faster, and the pyramid has already inverted. The demographic pyramid is already like this. Very few children and lots of old people. So we need to revert that. And for that, we cannot blame it on the USA, not at all. We should blame it on ourselves. That is why we have to be very proactive ourselves. And that is why I run for politics, to bring these issues to the public. I think this is fundamental. Also, I love the phrase. I also retweeted it about Aubrey de Grey, that we should make aging the new COVID, as Alberto Aparicio also mentioned. I sent that to several groups. I think it's fantastic, because we need another Manhattan Project for aging. That is what we need. About Andrew Steele, I also talked to him after his presentation, which was really fantastic. And he's a great speaker with a lot of knowledge. But my view is different in terms of the money. And I told him very clearly, he talks about $100 billion from the government. No, That is not the solution. We should have $100 billion from the private sector. And I will give you the example of the X Prize Foundation. The X Prize Foundation, with this health span prize of $100 million, already got over 600 teams participating on biological rejuvenation by 2030. With just $100 million, over 600 teams all over the world, including Spanish teams, British teams, I imagine Belgian teams, and of course, many teams from the USA, Canada, and other parts of the world. So I told Andrew, what we need is to have the X Prize, not for 100 million, but for $1 billion or for 100 billion. This will really increase the creativity of everybody, not just governments, universities, startups, pharmaceutical companies, hospitals, clinics, everything. This is what the X Prize has brought with only $100 million. So imagine if it was $1 billion or $100 billion, as Andrew Steele was mentioning. So anyway, that was my comment to Andrew Steele. And now I'm also very excited about AI. As David Wood mentioned, AI is not the solution, but it is very important. And I am very excited also about what is happening in AI. For example, DeepMind announced Alpha Genome. Alpha Genome is going to be very fascinating. And Demis Hassabis, the winner of the Nobel Prize 2024 in chemistry, Demis Hassabis, DeepMind, Google, he created this other company called Isomorphic Labs with the goal of using AI to cure all diseases. This is really fascinating. Of course, it is not the solution, but it is a big part of it. And in that same line of AI, also Mark Zuckerberg and his foundation with his wife, Priscilla Chan, they have announced that they are using AI to understand how all cells work, how all organs work, how all organisms work using AI. Of course, this is a huge project, but I think this is very important. So the Chan Zuckerberg Foundation is doing incredible work also on AI from a different point of view than what Google is doing with Alpha Genome or DeepMind with Isomorphic Labs. But anyway, so I am really excited about AI. It will help to accelerate things, and even more if we had an X Prize of $100 billion. That would really change. So Sven, put your cup of coffee to the X Prize. I would drink to the X Prize for $100 billion. That would give us rejuvenation very quickly.
Yes, well, thank you very much, Jose, for that note of optimism. I definitely hope that all of the initiatives you mentioned, the Alpha Genome Initiative from Google DeepMind, as well as the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative and the X Prize. Now, there is an X Prize for health span now of $101 million that is on offer, and various teams are competing for it already. I hope that these initiatives do contribute significantly to progress in the field. Right now, the magnitude is still not as large as the magnitude of the NIH cuts, and that's unfortunate. I do wish that all of this activity and the NIH-funded research had been happening in parallel, but unfortunately that is not something within our control at the present point. All that we can do is bring up the harms. But Dan, would you like to say?
Well, I just have a minor comment on what Jose said. I think it remains to be seen how much influence Jim O'Neill will have, but thank you for mentioning the MIT Tech Review article. I'll definitely look at that. But the other thing is that the new NIH director, Jay Bhattacharya, he is very interested in what we might call meta-science reforms. meta-science-inspired reforms and changing policies at the NIH around how funding is given out to support younger researchers, because they've been finding the age of NIH grantees has been going up and up and up. When he first came to NIH, he gave a talk where he talked about a number of problems in science, like the reproducibility crisis, and other things. So he actually has a background in meta-science himself. He actually years ago did some research on NIH and looking at if NIH was either at the state of the art or actually lagging behind universities in terms of what researchers were studying in the internal NIH intramural research program. So I think I'm most excited about that, and they have a lot of interesting ideas about changing how science is funded. But overall, it honestly, what I've been hearing, is fairly grim. Honestly, one thing I heard from Mark Hameline, who's at ARPA-H, is that the people at ARPA-H are very worried that could get shut down. So if ARPA-H was shut down, that would be devastating, because, as you know, we have Jean Hubert there and one or two other longevity folks. So I would just, if you hear anything about ARPA-H being cut, I think that would be a major thing we should try to fight if possible.
Yes, that is indeed troubling.
And that's just all rumors. I don't have any definite information on that, but it just seems like something they would do. Just because it was a Biden era thing, and they're trying to, quote, simplify and streamline and everything. So, yeah, we need to be on alert for this sort of things.
Yes, cutting ARPA-H would be an even greater travesty than what has transpired thus far. In my view, ARPA-H was one of the most promising, if not the most promising, federal initiatives that could have made a difference in anti-aging research.
And the director was actually fired. Regina, I forget her name, Regina something. She was, among all these different people who were fired. So the agency is in a little bit of a disarray, and I've heard that a lot of the staff who are contractors are no longer there due to funding cuts and everything. So it's very troubling.
Mm-hmm. Yes, at Vitalist Bay, about a month and a half ago, there were two representatives from ARPA-H. One was Dr. Jean Hébert, who is familiar to longtime attendees of our virtual enlightenment salons because he was a guest of ours in April of 2021, and then I moderated a panel with him at RadFest in October of 2022, so you can watch both of those sessions. He was there, and he told me he was fairly optimistic at that point that the decision makers within the Trump administration had sympathies for ARPA-H, but again, that was a month and a half ago. And then at Vitalist Bay, there was also Andrew Brack, who is a program manager at ARPA-H, and I essentially asked him a question. I tried to be as non-political as possible in the way I formulated that question, but I formulated it in essence as a statement that background stability is necessary in order to be able to effectively make long-term plans. How confident are you that you will have that kind of background stability for a 5-year time horizon so that your planning over the next 5 years can proceed essentially as you intended? But he saw through my wording and he said, well, I'm not going to comment on anything political, but ARPA-H is fully aligned with the MAHA agenda because our research is going to help make Americans healthier. So he phrased it in a bit more detail than that, but that was the essence of the answer. I couldn't get a gauge of how worried or concerned he was. I think he was rather trying to kind of signal to the powers that be that ARPA-H shouldn't be cut because it could be at least presented to align with their goals.
Right. Yeah, no, that's interesting. I mean, this was sort of off the record, I suppose, but I was talking with Mark Hemmeline, it's very unclear what's going on. But there's a hope, that if among some researchers that if they can brand their research properly as being part of the MAHA movement, whatever that is, they can maintain their funding. So I know like a lot of I spoke with a long COVID researcher who's trying to rebrand their research now, and they're studying the MAHA agenda and trying to rebrand. So that's supposedly the MAHA is supposed to be about chronic diseases and things like obesity, but they largely have been looking at very niche, flashy issues like food colorings, food dyes, which don't really have any effect on our health as far as all the gold standard research says. And some of the natural dyes that they're proposing actually have been much less studied than the artificial dyes. So it's very like the topics are kind of a lot very like showy topics, like that are designed to win over. I don't really know what they're doing honestly, but they're not looking at I haven't seen much on the big problems like obesity, cardiovascular disease, those kind of things.
Yes. Sometimes I don't think they know what they're doing. I don't think they know coherently what their agenda is other than to oppose whatever they consider to be the scientific establishment or the medical.
As far as things they're for, it's sort of a very like oddball mix of very low impact things that are but that are kind of controversial, like food dyes and fluoridation of water and stuff like that. So.
Yes, indeed. Now, David, you have a few remarks to share which are perhaps more hopeful.
Well, let me tie back some of the discussion to a presentation at Dublin, which is the starting point for all of this. One of the most inspiring slides of all was shown by Alexander Tietz-Latzer, who some of us know. He's a German lawyer. He has stood several times for the European Parliament. He's a longtime member of the ILA. He gave a talk about why we should be advocating that healthy longevity is recognized as a human right. But at the very end, he showed a picture of himself with, I thought, an 80-year-old woman or so. She was sitting there. Turned out that she was his grandmother, and she was 105 years old, and she looked remarkably healthy for a 105-year-old. So Alexander probably gets the prize for having the oldest healthy relative amongst all the speakers, as far as I know. So that was encouraging. Now, already we had mentioned from Jose that for his conference in Madrid last year, he was hoping to present to Maria Brañas, who was at the time the world's oldest person, 117 and a half years old. And sadly, she died a few days beforehand. It turns out that the oldest person in the world today, as far as we can validate, is actually living 20 miles away from where I am. Her name is Edith Ethel Caterham. She's 115 years old, so a relative youngster compared to Maria. She'll be 116 in a couple of months' time. So maybe the UK is doing some things right. We'll see. But it's the first time for a long, long time that the oldest person in the world has been in the UK. But actually, more seriously, the UK is trying hard to do something right. We've had an announcement by the government 4 days ago that there is a new 10-year plan for the NHS. And this 10-year plan will have 3 components in it. This was made by the UK's Chancellor, the UK's Secretary of State for Health, Wes Streeting, who himself is a cancer survivor. He's been at the sharp end of the NHS in his own life, and by the Prime Minister. And they basically said, we can't solve the problems of healthcare just by spending more money, doing more of the same. There has to be 3 fundamental changes. The first is from the hospital to the community. In other words, allow people to be treated more locally rather than having to go to big centralized hospitals. Secondly, moving from analog to digital, to hurry up and apply the best of AI and the best of other digital solutions. But the third of the 3 big transformations is the most promising. They're talking seriously about changing it from being a sickness industry to a prevention industry. And they're very open, they say, to figuring out how they can do more prevention earlier. So they should be interested to hear whatever Andrew Steele and others bring them. But they should also be looking at other presentations from Dublin, because some of the best presentations from Dublin, I thought, were also talking about what's happening in Singapore. Singapore government has recognized the crisis that they have with more elderly people who are unwell. And they have given lots of initiatives to try and improve the health span rather than just the lifespan, so that people live healthier for longer. And they are describing themselves as the first engineered blue zone. In other words, they have longer lives, not just because of what has happened historically and traditionally, but interventions are being put in place. So it is my recommendation to the UK government and elsewhere, we should be learning from what's happening in Singapore. Somebody said he thought there were 2 countries that were doing particularly well in terms of engineering improvements to healthcare. There was Singapore, and the other was, and this was a bit of a surprise to me, it was Denmark. And the reason they thought Denmark was doing particularly well is in part because of all the work being done by the group behind RDD, the annual conference there. So I think we should be learning from each other. And in order to actually go forwards, governments are going to have to set aside their nationalistic bias. Hey, we're the best, you know. We British, we've got the mother of parliaments. What can we learn from others? Well, actually, we have plenty we can learn from others. America first. Well, maybe America should be learning from Singapore and Denmark as well. And with this kind of attitude, it's openness and humility, we can actually pick up the best practices from around the world. So that's what I think should be happening. What's happening in America now is, let's say, an extraordinary experiment, but hopefully people will realize, hey, maybe they should be feeding in some of the insights from Singapore and Spain, Madrid, and Copenhagen and elsewhere too.
Yes, indeed. I think it's important to learn from successes and successful implementations anywhere in the world. Wherever something is found to work, we should utilize it, and hopefully it will gain traction in many other jurisdictions as well. I wanted to briefly mention my own presentation at Longevity Summit Dublin. I will not go through it in entirety, but I did want to note that I presented on LEV the Game, which is the game where one gets to play as a character seeking to reach longevity escape velocity. And fortunately, I do have a few pictures of my presentation. The recording should be out later once Longevity Summit Dublin publishes all of the talks on its YouTube channel. but right now you see the screenshot of one of the slides where I provide some background as to the origins of LEV, the game, and how the US Transhumanist Party came to acquire the rights to develop it in 2020. And I developed an entirely new set of mechanics and in-game events for the game. I transformed it into a turn-based game with the help of Juraj Stern-Vukotic, whom I hired as the programmer. And of course, we held a virtual enlightenment salon in 2024, in May of 2024, to demonstrate an earlier build, which is build 0.6 of LEV, the game. But now we have a much more current version, which is build 0.91, and it is available to download and play at transhumanist-party.org/lev-the-game. You have the ability to download it in one of two archive formats, zip and rar. And you can also, if the archive formats don't work with your computer or your laptop for whatever reason, download the files directly. I've made them available in a Google Drive folder. So either way, if you have a PC, whether it's a Windows PC or a Linux PC, please download the game, give it a try yourself, and see if you can get your character to longevity, escape velocity. I think my presentation was very well received among the attendees, and I'm going to also be presenting on LEV, the game, at RADFest in Las Vegas in just less than a week's time. So I am definitely looking forward to that. Jose, would you like to say a few remarks?
Well, great. I want to practice with your game, and congratulations on your presentation. And again, it's good that we are going to meet in Las Vegas. I'm flying on Tuesday. And it is important to get different audiences, different publics. So that is why I was so happy to see David, Sven, and you, Gennady, in Dublin. And I see you also now soon in Las Vegas. And welcome to Madrid as well. We need to have more and more until longevity becomes a fact of life. That is my goal, and that is why we have to do it. We have to do it. That is why, Sven, I didn't like, and don't take it personally, your comment, which is Andrew Steele's comments about 1 cup of coffee a day. John Fisher at Kennedy had a great phrase. Well, he had many, like many of these sometime politicians. Churchill is even better. But John Fisher at Kennedy said, don't ask America what can it do for you. Ask what you can do for America. So my phrase is, don't ask what longevity can do for you. Ask what you can do for longevity. And that is putting the money of your cup of coffee, and don't blaming our American friends or US friends, because they are doing better than in Europe in terms of funding for longevity research, even though, which is a tragedy, this is the real tragedy, that the USA longevity expectancy is so low, especially after putting almost 20% of the gross domestic product, both on public and private health. I mean, this is horrible. With all that money, that the outcome is so poor. And let me just go back to the blue zones, because David was talking about the blue zones. And indeed, Singapore declared itself as a blue zone 2.0, which I think is an interesting experiment. And this is what we want to do in Madrid, because the original blue zones are just a marketing plot by Dan Bertner when he was at National Geographic, and what he wrote, the 5 blue zones, traditional blue zones, Sardinia in Italy, Icaria in Greece, Okinawa in Japan, Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica, and Loma Linda in California. All of them have lower life expectancies than Madrid. So how can they be blue zones? And these are tiny places, like Icaria. Icaria is a statistical mistake. Madrid has over 8 million people with a longer life expectancy than Icaria, Sardinia, Okinawa, Loma Linda. But just one more thing about this being marketing. I was a few months ago in Miami, and maybe some of you know that the Seventh-day Adventist Church bought the rights of the blue zones. They paid, I don't know if $2-3 million to Dan Bertner for the idea, the concept, and now they are building a huge center in downtown Miami, which I visited. It's called the Blue Zone Center. And again, it was just marketing. If you really want a Blue Zone Center, come to Madrid.
All right. Thank you, Jose. And you and I had a conversation as to what potential hypotheses could explain the greater longevity of people in Madrid. I had a hypothesis, but it ended up being incorrect. So I would be interested in more studies being done as to why the life expectancy in Madrid is relatively so high, over 86 years. That is impressive for a city, especially.
Yes, for a city so big. But again, we will show the answer. That is why we are commissioning not one or two, but 3 studies by the consulting company McKinsey, by the Royal Academy of Medicine of Spain, and by the National Science Foundation of Spain. So I hope one of those 3 will find out the results that do have to do something with the points of the blue zones. I repeat, Mediterranean diet, exercise, family relations, and as the French say, joie de vivre, the joy to be alive, which is what we want to transfer.
Exactly.
Everybody.
And you, Jose, are making them live so long by being so enthusiastic.
Yes, Jose, you are definitely an exemplar of that. So thank you for being a role model to all those who seek to take joy in life. And I also wanted to bring up 3 comments from David Wood. First of all, he says, Google Road to Recovery, the government's 2025 mandate to NHS England to find more details of the UK government initiative that he mentioned. Another recommendation from David, one of the best AI tools to improve scientific discovery, in his view, is Future House, funded by, among other sources, Eric Schmidt, who used to be the CEO of Google. And finally, in the spirit of ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country, he would recommend the book Moral Ambition by Rutger Bregman. So please check out those resources. And Sven, would you like to say any more? I see you've got some slides pulled up.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. So first of all, I have to say mea culpa to Jose, because he's absolutely right that Belgium is not doing anything in this area. Some other European countries are doing something. In Germany, you have the Max Planck Institute. In the Netherlands, you have the European Research Institute for the Biology of Aging, ERIBA for short. But in Belgium, we don't have anything. In fact, my lab and another lab have shut down all their aging work, so we are even losing it. There is less aging work being done in Belgium now than a few years ago. And I would like to see a European Institute of Aging being established, but let's hope that comes one day. I also can testify that Alex's grandmother is indeed doing so well. At least several years ago, I was lucky enough to meet her, and she lives at home with her daughter, who herself is an old, in her 80s by now, still able to do everything and is fully clear in mind. But what I really wanted to talk about is the AI discussion. I had some comments to make on that. I think we already have developed automated tools. As Gennady was saying, we need some type of cyborg type of tool that will test the research. And in fact, well, we already have fully automated. I can show here how a fully automated lab looks like in the pharmaceutical industry. Now, these are labs that don't use AI to do the experiments. So it's humans coming up with experiments and the robots doing it. However, small-scale integration systems have already been built where AI comes up with hypotheses, and then you have a fully automated lab that tests the hypothesis that the AI comes up with, and then the findings from that gets funneled back into the AI, who comes up with new hypotheses that then get tested. But there are challenges in all of this. So the challenges that were also pointed out at the conference is the lack of data, and also there is no incentive for people to build a large data set, to build a library of all the data that exists, because who is going to fund that work? And the LLMs were trained on millions of books, but we don't have that type of centralized access to scientific data. Now, a problem with the scientific data is also it's very heterogeneous. You have text data, obviously, you have tables, you have graphs, you have histological sections, you have Western blots. So you have all of these different data, which will need different types of training to be used for AI to be analyzing those. And of course, as was pointed out, you still will need to do experiments with all that data. So in my opinion, AI is a tool, just like other scientific tools. It's not replacing the existing tools, but it's adding to the existing tools. And yes, I'm very hopeful that AI will accelerate our research, just like every other scientific tool. Think about CRISPR-Cas has also accelerated our scientific research. Our MassSpec has also accelerated our research. Every one of these scientific tools accelerates research. In fact, the best way to accelerate scientific research is to build a new tool, because tools generally bring in a lot of new knowledge. So that was my remarks.
Yes, thank you very much, Sven. And I completely agree. AI is a new tool or a new suite of tools, and it will definitely help to accelerate the pace of research. But the best way in which it will help will be in addition to existing tools and the efforts of human scientists as well, though the AI-operated lab that you showed is quite impressive. So I live in northern Nevada, and in Reno, Nevada, there is a facility operated by Dr. Bill Andrews. His company, Sierra Sciences, is leasing about 10,000 square foot building with lab space. And prior to the pandemic, he would give people tours of the lab space, including the assay robots that he had, which also could essentially test several hundred samples a minute. And these particular robots that you showed are even more advanced than what Bill Andrews demonstrated. His robots are definitely more than a decade old, probably around 2 decades old, based on my knowledge of when he had essentially peak funding to acquire those robots. But yes, some functions of lab experiments, such as taking assays of various substances, can be automated and indeed scaled up massively through this kind of technology. And if AI can supply certain hypotheses, as in test these substances in this manner, these robots could, at least in principle, implement those tests. So we have about 6 minutes left in our virtual Enlightenment Salon today. I would like to ask Art Ramon if he has any questions or comments based on what has been discussed or anything else he's curious about in regard to Longevity Summit Dublin.
Not specifically with the summit, but just from what I remember hearing this one guy on YouTube, he's an influencer, ex-CIA guy. He says that the government sees the population like this superorganism, just a GD-producing superorganism, and reminds me like early on during COVID, how they predicted there would be like 2.2 million deaths, and they had to throttle that death by the lockdowns. Well, with the upcoming job apocalypse, maybe they want to increase that death rate, because you're just going to have an excess number of people who aren't going to be producing much. So that's just kind of cynical, I know, but that's what comes to mind when I see like the funding cuts at NIH. It's just they really don't care. They kind of need that turnover of the superorganism, and maybe the funding will come back one day, but in the short term, with the slow-moving world war, they have other things to concentrate on. But hopefully, other countries can pick up the slack. The European Union and like I said, those blue zones. Hopefully, they can pick up the slack while the U.S. drops the ball.
Yes, fortunately, and I'll say this fortunately, the power elites, especially in the United States, are too uncoordinated and too short-sighted, in my view, to be the kinds of systems thinkers that they would need to be in order to be deliberately seeking the reduction of the human population in the manner you described. So I'm a bit more optimistic in that I don't think they're smart enough to even come up with that idea. I think they are essentially pursuing very short-termist agendas, appealing to their base, and really acting in almost complete ignorance of what they're doing. So they're cutting so thoughtlessly because really they haven't thought about the implications of what they're cutting, and they haven't thought about how it would affect their longevity personally. Because if a power elite were to engage in the kind of nefarious scheme you describe, at least they would have protected some of the longevity research for themselves, but they're not even doing that. So I would say I'm not going to attribute to malice something that can be explained by incompetence, or as Jose would put it, human stupidity. But thank you for your observation there. I think it's also important to note, and this was observed previously, that there are concerns about who will access these advances, and that's a worthwhile discussion to have. Mike Lezine pointed this out in some of his comments. He wrote, all of these different types of technologies sound very expensive. How many people have healthcare plans that can cover these procedures, or is it all out of pocket? And David Wood wrote, this is something we should come back to because it's a very important question. So David, we have about 2 minutes left. I wonder if you could provide some brief points in response to Mike, and then we will conclude.
So we've discussed a bit of this already. This is when I talked about, well, we can scale things up if we have government support, government guarantees for using the products at scale. But another thing that has already been mentioned here, and I want to support what Jose Cordero was saying, which is that there can be prizes which can galvanize lots of innovative new solutions. So there has recently been a selection of, semi-finalists? There were many more companies and organizations or teams that have produced high quality research than had been feared. So this is very encouraging. But another thing that's very encouraging about XPRIZE, I want to give a shout out to Alberto Aparicio, because he gave a very nice presentation at Dublin. It's worth checking out once the videos are available. He pointed out that the way the XPRIZE for HealthSpan had been set up, it actually met a lot of the possible ethical concerns that some people might have had. They might have thought, well, are these people really informed of what's going on? He had raised about 7 different possible ethical concerns, and he argued that this had been very well designed. And so this is another reason to expect that the XPRIZE HealthSpan is going to have a big impact. And one final reference to one more talk. is the idea from Keith Comito, who is the president of the Lifespan Research Institute. He gave a very interesting talk, which he basically talked a lot about a Disney narrative, which had come from an ancient Indonesian narrative about Maui, in which he related some of our present day concerns about slowing down aging to an ancient Indonesian idea about slowing down the sun. And Keith's bigger argument is, we need to explore different ways of talking about what we're doing that might resonate with ancient cultural traditions or other ways to make people inspired. And so Keith is saying, let's be creative in the narratives as well as pursuing the science. And this matches my own view that what we're doing here is not just bioengineering, it is narrative engineering and also community engineering. And it's by doing these three things well, and that goes way, way beyond technology, that we can bring down the cost for everybody and get more people united together working on these problems rather than being distracted into all the kind of terrible things that most of us do often get distracted into.
Yes, thank you very much, David, for those inspiring words. And indeed, we need all of these forms of engineering so that we can all live long and prosper.